In this presentation, we're going to be learning about Korean culture. We're also going to be learning about why it's important that we know how the Koreans think, how they speak, how they act, and how they interact and communicate with one another and with people from other nations. If we want to succeed in business with the Koreans, then we need to know these things. Okay. In operating any company with global partnerships, large or small, it's imperative that the company's employees be familiarized with the culture and the practices of the people with whom they encounter. Being engaged in global business partnerships is an excellent way to expand the size, the impact, and the profitability of your enterprise. That's why, as a company, as we begin negotiating trade and labor deals with the people of Korea, we must take time to learn about the Korean culture, their communication methods, their gestures, and more. An opportunity such as this one does not present itself very often. And with that in mind, we must capitalize on this partnership. One major reason why we will be learning a little bit about Korean culture and practice and why it's so important is because if you do not understand their culture, it's likely that you could be offended by something one of our Korean partners does or says. Even more unfortunate would be if you offended them. In order for our company to cooperate, to negotiate, and to communicate best with the people of Korea, we must have a thorough understanding of their culture, their habits, their practices, and more. With all this in mind, the thesis, the thing that we will be focusing on, is the sentence below. In order for our company to cooperate, to negotiate, and communicate best with the people of Korea, we must have a thorough understanding of their culture, practices, and habits. First, let's speak about the Korean language and dialect. The Korean language is a very interesting language. It actually bears many similarities to the Japanese and Chinese languages. Those being the bordering nations, they have significant influence on this language, on the way that it's written, and on the way that it's spoken. Korean is considered an ancient language. It dates back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and people have been speaking it for a long time. However, there are not many dialects and variations to the Korean language that people speak today. Now we need to talk about nonverbal communication in Korean culture. In Korean culture, eye contact can be very disrespectful, especially in reference to someone who is young or a subordinate looking their elder in the eye. This is seen as a sign of disrespect, and so many Koreans will avoid to do this. They might even do it to an American or to someone who's not familiar with their culture because that's what they're used to. Touching is also accepted in Korean culture. Unlike looking someone in the eye, touching the hand to the shoulder or holding hands or perhaps even hugging is acceptable in public, and it's not frowned upon in the slightest. But facial expressions are very limited in Korean culture. People do not really show much emotion or what they're feeling based on their facial expression. They might say what they're thinking and what they're feeling, but their tones of conversation are very mild and they keep things pretty quiet. So sounding too aggressive, being too overt, being too loud can be offensive to a Korean. So we should watch out for that when we communicate with them. Religion plays a very important part in Korean culture that we should know about. Korea is actually the origin and the birthplace of the major world religion, Buddhism. However, today, Buddhism is not the only major world religion that has a strong presence in Korea. Korea also has a large Christian presence to go alongside with its Buddhist presence. However, when it comes to the workplace, religion should not play a factor. Korean people are highly unlikely to talk about what they believe or their religious preferences in the workplace, and so we should watch out for that when we communicate with them and not bring up what we believe. Now we're going to talk about time and time management in Korean culture. In Korean culture, deadlines are to be respected and not extended. In fact, if you're an employee and you've received a deadline from your employer for a project or assignment, you're expected to meet that deadline and to not ask for it to be extended. To ask for it to be extended would be considered laziness and it would be very disrespectful to your employer or to the person who gave you the assignment. In the same sense, asking for time off or family vacation time is relatively frowned upon in Korean culture. Employees and employers are made very uncomfortable when they're asked for time off and vacation time. So usually people just don't do it and they stay working all year round. The only time in which asking for time off is acceptable is for a family or health issue. Under those circumstances, it's acceptable to ask for leave. Another important facet of time in Korean culture is showing up early. Let's say a meeting starts at 3 o'clock. If the meeting starts at 3 o'clock, you're expected to be there at 2:45. To show up at 3 o'clock for the 3 o'clock meeting would be considered laziness. The meeting should be starting exactly at 3 and not later than 3. People don't want to wait for you to show up. So, instead, you should show up a little bit early. Another facet of time in Korean culture is leaving on time. Let's say the meeting is supposed to end at 3:30 or 3:45. You should not stand around talking to friends until 4 o'clock. That would be considered disrespectful to other people's time and to your employer's time. You need to leave when it is specified that you should leave. In Korean culture, there's also a specific way of dressing. Generally, business attire is similar to that of Americans. Women do not necessarily have a specific way that they're supposed to dress. However, although they don't have specific clothes they're supposed to be wearing, they need to be modest and they need to be professional in the way that they dress. Avoiding being informal is very important. To be informal in the way that you dress in your workplace as a woman is to be disrespectful to your employer. Men, on the other hand, do have a specific way that they are expected to dress in the workplace. Men are expected to wear a suit and a tie, and if they're not wearing the suit and tie, they should at least be wearing a button-up and slacks. This way of dressing is almost mandatory in Korean culture and in the workplace. Now let's talk about the gender roles in Korea. In Korean culture, men are typically treated better in the workplace than women are. Women are not necessarily harassed, and they're not mistreated. However, men receive higher wages than women. Oftentimes, men and women can do the exact same job, and the men will be paid significantly higher wages than the women will. Korea is not as progressive a nation as Western nations when it comes to gender roles and equality. Another important aspect of Korean culture is their explicit and implicit cultural behavior. To Koreans, there is no sugarcoating in the way that they speak. Oftentimes, a Korean will say exactly what's on their mind. It's not meant to be offensive, but they might ask very personal questions just after meeting you. For example, you might have just met someone you're going to be doing business with who is Korean, and they might ask you something like, "Are you a Christian? What do you believe? How much do you make per year? What kind of car do you drive? Where do you live?" Now, these questions might seem a little invasive and inappropriate, but this is not inappropriate at all in Korean culture. In fact, this is commonplace. Koreans are also just as forward and open about their romantic behavior in public displays. Let's talk about some acceptable behavior in Korea that might not be so acceptable in American culture. Americans place a high value on the weekend, on rest, and on rejuvenation, while Koreans place a high value on long hours, on studying, on spending late nights at work. From a young age, Koreans are encouraged to study for hours a day so they can get good grades, succeed in school, and ultimately succeed in life. This is not necessarily the case in American culture. Another mannerism that is different in Korean culture is the way that they eat. A good example that's different in the way that Koreans eat from the way Americans eat is Koreans are encouraged to make lots of sounds when they eat, such as slurping. While this might be uncommon, in fact, probably a little inappropriate to an American, slurping at the table in Korea is a compliment. It shows that the chef or the cook did a good job, and it's appropriate. This is something that's important to know if you're ever going on, let's say, a business dinner, or business lunch with one of our Korean associates. Lastly, let's talk about a fun fact about Korean culture. Koreans typically eat this thing called kimchi at every meal. Kimchi is a cabbage dish. It can be served hot, cold, spicy. It can be served sweet. It can have other things in it. It can have chicken in it. It can have beef in it. Kimchi can really be anything you want it to be. Kimchi is typically fermented from a few days to even over a year sometimes. However, the longer you ferment the kimchi, the more significantly different the taste will be. Many Koreans have a specific preference, and so they buy it as such. Thanks for watching! I hope you know more about Korean culture now. I think after this presentation we will be well equipped to deal with our new Korean partners. This will be a very successful enterprise, thanks to our knowledge of Korean culture, communication, and interaction. Have a great day.